I'm kind of an outsider map maker, and I use Luddite technologies. So I'm kind of a postmodern Luddite. I'm an 1840 letterpress. Just treadle it. It's a lot of fun. And I do stone lithography. So, but this talk today is, I really want to focus on asking us as map makers to do more in the making of maps. And I'm not so much interested in the maps, but I'm interested in the making and how we go about that making and how you go about that making. And I think we're talking to sort of the cream of the crop of map makers, or a lot of you here are. So I want to ask you to do more because, I probably don't need my glasses. Because I don't think we're doing enough. And I, for one, am just kind of appalled at the situation in the world today and what map makers aren't doing. And so we need to step forward and take risks. And if we are in positions of responsibility, we should find funding and we should find and use our empowerment as map makers, as people who understand spatial information to do more. Okay. So the practice that I'm going to talk about today is basically from the Buddhist sutras, but I'm using that to articulate something, which is basically that we're mapping a body. And the contemplation of the body in the body is a famous concept in Buddhist thought, and it starts with the breath. Some of you may be well familiar with this, but I'm going to talk about it in terms of map makers, the practicality of entering into that body and doing so in a way that where we do not see ourselves as separate from that body. This picture is taken on a 65-mile run across one of the greatest wilderness areas in the 48 states. It took us all day. It's a long run, and you see grizzly bears, you see a lot. You get wet, your feet are tired, your feet are sore. It's your body, and you start to enter into your body and the body of the place. It's this amazing experience where we're having lunch here and we stop for a swim. You immerse your body in the water, in the air around you. It's a complete experience. That's the body, my body, that's the body in the body. And I think this is the place that we should begin when we start to make maps, rather than to begin with the database, rather than to begin with the technology, rather than that we begin with an agenda. We can go back to the body in the body. And the Zen peacemakers have 3 steps that I think are very helpful to help us enter into that body. And the first is not knowing. You might think I'm a Buddhist. I'm not a Buddhist. I can sit. Maybe I'm a Christian. Maybe I'm a Muslim. I find it very poly. I don't really find one answer. My answer really comes from this experience of dancing across the beauty of the world. Not knowing is the first thing we can do when we start to make a map. And not knowing is not easy at all. It's one of the most difficult things to do, to not know. Because often we start with an agenda or some data or some preconceived ideas. But not knowing is staggeringly difficult and so important to not know at that point. One of the things we can do to enter into that space of the body in the body is by just finding out everything we can. So here I stopped on the shore of Lake Merritt one day. This is an invitation from the New York Times to take an observation on the 2nd of May. It was a Sunday. And so I tried to enter into the visible body as thoroughly as I could. What was this? What at that moment, at 8 a.m. on Sunday morning, May the 2nd, what I could measure, what I could taste, what I could see, everything. And, I think like I said, I forgot my glasses. Robert says, to see the invisible, we have to completely immerse ourselves first in what is visible. But I'm not talking about going online and seeing what the temperature was that morning. I'm talking about measuring the temperature yourself. What is it right there at that moment? It's not as much about that as you're paying attention to that, in that place, in that time. And that is a very complicated place. It is interwoven, it's changing. Oh, I read just the most delightful poem today about water. I was over at the Center for the Book Arts, and they had a little tiny poem that said, the water is always changing, but not on a map. I got my glasses. I can actually read what I'm trying to say. It's tiny print up here. So, okay, so 1960, quite a while ago, I was on a canoe trip, early August, in the Boundary Waters, actually, Hegman Lake. Some of you may have been there. We were floating in these magnificent wood canvas canoes silently. It was a gorgeous day. I can remember it because we decided to have lunch while we were floating. And we had this horrible rye crisp that was just tasteless for lunch, and we could put whatever we wanted on it. And I would dip the rye crisp in the water, and I looked up, and there was this staggering experience. I left my body. I don't know. Is this what Christ meant when we are invited into the body of Christ? Was this rye crisp and this staggering experience where I became shield rock at that moment? This was the body. It was timeless. It lasted for days, seconds. But this profound experience for me was this transcendence into the body. And what I saw after that was never the same. And I think it's worthwhile that you should read this. We might think of it this way. Minds can be trained to filter out experiences that would otherwise give testimony about the realities of the world that we do not wish to acknowledge. This is the author of, this is Vine DeLorean, Custer Died for My Sins, the famous Sioux author, but he's talking about Jung at this point, and he's saying, wow, we can filter all this out, but maybe we should question all this stuff we're filtering out. So this goes back to not knowing. This is tricky stuff, but if we can not know, so at that moment when I saw the pictographs, I didn't know that that was fish oil mixed with iron, that it was on shield rock. I didn't know that this was, the Anishinabe's, moment of saying, I too am human. I just was entered into that body. Not knowing is one of the most profound experiences that we can invite ourselves or practice that contemplation of the body in the body to have. However, that said, I wonder if we should be putting that on Instagram. I wonder if we should be putting that place, taking a picture of it, taking a profanity of it, by naming it, by owning it. I wonder if something that it might be that we don't put that on the map. So here's a map of those pictographs on Lower Basswood, a different set, and they're marked on there. So people go through the Boundary Waters now being told what to see, where to portage, where the rapids are, what the name of the rapids is, what the name of the lake is. In one moment, there's a map of the invisible, and the next moment, that map is gone. Without name. It's simply washed away, put in a bag, and dropped in the river. This is amazingly different cultural response to the invisible world map that we live in without knowing it. So after that, I started to see, after that not knowing and being invited into the rock, the air, the water, I started to see things differently. And I started to make maps differently and responding differently from that not knowing. So this is a response that I made. It invites you into that space in a different way. It's no less rational or irrational. It's just a different way of responding. And that's what I'm asking you to do, to consider different ways, to consider doing more. And I'm not going to label it ethical or not ethical. I'm just suggesting that take risks. The second is bearing witness. And this also is challenging. And I find this quite difficult because I'm somebody that really is not terribly fond of what's happening in my neck of the woods, all the building going on and everything that's changing radically before me. And so, but I have to, this is a block and a half from my house, and it blocks my view. And every unit has been bought by out-of-state millionaires. Yet, to bear witness, I have to say, that's there. I can't ignore it. I can't say that's not happening. To bear witness in the world is to bear witness to the suffering in the world, to the joys in the world. Yeah, oh, I said that there. That's good. So I was over at the Book Arts today, and I picked this up. I don't know if some of you know David Budbill's work, wonderful poet. And he has this little tiny letter set poem. It was just gorgeous. What Isa heard. 200 years ago, Isa heard the morning birds singing sutras to this suffering world. I heard them too this morning, which must mean, since we will always have a suffering world, we must always have a song. I really like that. There's joy in their suffering. So, bearing witness is also to bear witness to the more than human. And, of course, almost all of our mapping, I'd say the bulk of our mapping involves human elements. I mean, that we see, and, I used one here today to figure out just where the Book Arts was so I could walk over there. It's just a human engaged mapping we're in, but the world has a lot more than that. Things come, things go in this bearing witness. They might not always be here. And a real good example of that is last week, we renamed the bridge through town. This was a profound experience for the Salish Kootenai. In 1891, they were driven out of the Bitterroot Valley and forced across this bridge. It's a historic moment for them, into the reservations to the north so that the white settlers could claim their land in the Bitterroot. Last week, we finally got approval to rename the bridge, Bear Traps Bridge. And I really didn't realize how important that was to them. And I listened to an hour and a half of drumming and talk where they let us know, everybody was mostly white people there, let us know how important that was to rename the bridge, to rename it for one of their chiefs in the Salish Kootenai tribe. And one of the things that they said was, place matters, place names matter. I really appreciated that. So bearing witness is about that, which now leads us to what you can do, which is to take action. And notice I've said all this before, go make a map, because taking action for us means making a map. And this is a performance mapping piece I did on the top of Mount Sentinel. And I like to think that our maps, the potential for our maps, the great potential is still trapped inside a rock. It's bound up by the owners of the the corporations, the technology, the wealth in the world, it's bound inside. But inside there's gold. And that gold is for you to open up, to find. Find it however you can. Take risks. Get fired. I was. It's okay. I'm still here. So the contemplation of the body and the body, bring that gold out. It's incredibly important that we do this. The basis of right map making is to make maps in mindful generosity and loving kindness. That's the deal. And if we start with this exploration, this contemplation of the body and the body, loving kindness will come out in our maps. It's inevitable. So here's the inspiration for our future. Find and support ways to map and understand the world for a future to be possible. Thank you.